And I was literally scratching my head. Am I Black? Oh my God, this is a space for me. And it was just so refreshing to know that I can be authentically self, and I am encouraged to be authentically self. And this is the first time in my educational journey where I can explore that. What does a genuinely decentered space look like in a creative education and the fashion industry? Welcome to this special episode of the RCA podcast, where we're exploring this question and reflecting on the deep, transformative work required to create educational spaces and the fashion sector that are genuinely anti-racist and equitable. Hi, I'm Joyce Davis, a graduate from the Royal College of Art and the first Black female academic in the RCA's Fashion MA program. I graduated in 2023, supported by both Frank Bolin Scholarship and Leather Seller Scholarship. My time at the RCA has been a profound journey, one where I've come to embrace my authentic self as a creative, a storyteller, and a Black British female in academia. My work focuses on sustainability. I explore waste streams between the UK and Ghana, focusing on footwear waste. I've been honoured to present my research at the United Nations Ghana, centering my work around a guiding question. If it can't be dismantled or absorbed by the earth, should it really exist? My focus is on the afterlife of fashion and how we embed the dismantling processes at inception of design in the hope to find more circular solutions. I'm also a proud member of FACE, Fashion Academics Creating Equity, a collective founded to tackle systemic issues in creative education, especially within the arts. FACE is driven by a belief in the powerful intersection of fashion, art, and academia to spark meaningful change. Today, I'm thrilled to be speaking with Andrew Ibby, co-founder of FACE and a dedicated advocate for equity in the creative education. Andrew wears many hats. He's a creative director, a fashion designer, and a curator, recently having curated the amazing The Missing Threads exhibition at Somerset House. He leads the VA Fashion Design and Communication course at Liverpool, John Moores University, and we're proud to count him as a part of RCA's community, where he's an external examiner for the fashion department. FACE's annual summit is taking place at the RCA this year on November 7th and 8th. It will bring together industry leaders, innovators, and RCA alumni to explore what it truly means to decenter education. Andrew and I came together to kick off this conversation on how academia and the industry can collaborate to create fairer and more open spaces for everyone. So let's get this conversation started. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. What is FACE and how did it come about?
FACE. So FACE was an idea. It was a simple idea. So in the wake of George Floyd, we decided that we need to get together and we need kind of answers, really, and progress. And so it was an idea about, well, how many Black fashion academics are there in the land, and what would happen if we all got together and we all formed a group, a merry band of Black fashion academics.
Creating equality.
And we spoke and we tabled, our experiences. And then from there, we developed some sort of strategic plan to tackle the inequality in the arts education. So fashion academics creating equality quickly became fashion and the arts creating equality. And I think that sort of allowed us to capture different voices from up and down the country, different intersectionality, which was also really important. So do note that you're the first Black woman academic at the Royal in the faculty, right? Which is bonkers. Sounds mad to say it, but that kind of progress was where sort of FACE stepped in. And we decided that well, actually, this isn't going to happen without a collective, without a community of kind of major operators as well, because it's not like we were all, part-timers. Some of us had incredible positions in these institutions. So we had big, powerful voices. It's just that in isolation, it's like you're talking in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
So getting everybody together.
Yeah. Which is like church. I remember we used to say.
Like church. It was like therapy or church. Yeah. And some of those early conversations were it's just pure trauma, really. Yeah. But the realization that we were all going through similar dramas within our own institutions and historically as well.
Yeah.
So the experience of that made us understand that there was a necessity. So it was a conversation with, actually it was Sarah Moa that put me in contact with Pascal. Mm-hmm. And then we found Sharon and the Three Musketeers, we got our swords out and then it was David Capo and all sorts of people just came together. Mm-hmm. It was in our own time. Yeah. It took up a lot of energy, a lot of space. Those early meetings were like,
oh wow,
like 3 or 4 hours long.
Myself and Jacob used to do Clubhouse sessions on Sundays.
Yeah. Clubhouse, Sunday Clubhouse. So really just, and finding that strategy. And then there's this point where really it grows. It's really prominent. We start having summits. So we had one at CSM, and of course this one is, the Royal College of Art.
Yes.
We start putting out surveys. Yeah. So we capture the student voice. Mm-hmm. We have one out at the moment to see my academic face. So we're speaking to academics. It diversifies from being solely about black and brownness to include allies. Yeah. So the organization just kind of grows. But it's not so big that it doesn't feel like family still, because I think that's the other thing.
It's always been family, I feel.
It's all about family.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. What does it mean to decenter a space, particularly in the context of higher education and industry?
Yeah, so we've had lots of conversations around this concept of decolonization, which is, it's a great word and it's a very kind of direct word. But I think that decentering maybe is an evolution in a way, because it really allows people, I think, freedom and democracy to put themselves central to anything. So if you decenter a space, it means you take away the kind of the hierarchical structure and power that existed, and you replace it with new perspectives, new voices, new people. And so all you're really doing is saying, okay, well, what is HE? At this point, who has the power? Where are the voices coming from? Where did those voices come from in the first place? And what if you just kind of shift the focus onto somebody else or somewhere else? And I think that decentering becomes really kind of easy to understand. And I also believe that more people can get involved with that as a kind of a concept and will feel empowered by it. Because decentering, I think at the heart of it deals with intersectionality as well, because it sometimes when you use the term decolonization, it can be alienating for some people. But when you talk about decentering, and we're talking about allies as well, the language for me is almost stronger, and it empowers people, I think in the context of fashion, for sure, because you really do then take it away from the structure of, Western kind of elitist perspectives. And you say, well, what if somebody else could contribute to this conversation?
There's a question that many people ask, and I just feel like I will just put it out there. Like, what does a genuinely decentered and anti-racist institution look like in practice?
I don't think it exists right now. Because I think that the conversations we have just have always been centered on a specific singular perspective. The conversations we're having now are vast and richer. they're way more richer. You know, they're talking about inclusivity and people having voices. I think we're just at the start of that process, and we're still kind of sparring as well, because of course there's so much kind of pushback as well. Where do I fit into this then? So if you're decentering, well, what about me? Well, you can also be part of that conversation. What we're doing now is just kind of sharing, you know, our voices. We're amplifying our voices together. So it's not just about one perspective. So in terms of an institution that exists at this point, I would say it doesn't exist. And even in places where you would imagine there to be decentered voices, so let's just say Ghana or Nigeria, we're talking about homeland, the perspectives of you know, education there are still very much focused on Western ideas. So even those spaces where there is potential to have conversations about, you know, what are we doing here? What's in fashion terms? What we wear? You know, our perspectives have always been focused on someone else. So it doesn't really exist now. And but I think globally now what we're doing is we're kind of pulling it apart brick by brick.
Yeah. Well, I just like to interject on that. I can only go by experience. And 2 years ago, I came to the RCA as a person that wanted to explore and understand self, having been in the UK educational system for over 20 odd years, never really got an opportunity to explore my blackness and self, and didn't even know I was allowed to. So
exactly,
like, it was just wild.
It is wild.
And it was literally on the first day or the first week, it was this kind of like a full immersion week. And Zoe Broach is the head of program of fashion at RCA. We created a week where we had people like Harris Elliott, who spoke about Wu-Tang Clan and what that meant of like what was community. And then we had Lasibo, who was based in South Africa, talking about heritage and identity. And I was literally scratching my head. Am I black? Oh my God, this is a space for me. And it was just so refreshing to know that I can be authentically self, and I am encouraged to be authentically self. And this is the first time in my educational journey where I can explore that. No, I would say nowhere is perfect, but I feel firsthand that I've experienced that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Zoe's perspective on fashion is incredible anyway. And I think what she's brought to the Royal College of Art is a broader understanding of culture and its place in fashion, right? So, and as soon as you start to recognize that fashion is not just about clothes, and it's really about how we walk and how we sound and how we dress and the music we make and, you know, so forth, right? You realize the impact of other cultural interventions on fashion. Once you understand that, you realize where the, if you like, the spark comes from. So, you know, what I would say, if you want to speak about streetwear as being the kind of most powerful driver in fashion right now, you only really need to trace it back to its roots and you understand the imprint of blackness on fashion. Now, that imprint, ultimately, if you're not teaching that as an institution, you're doing your students a disservice.
100%.
And I think that the other thing that when we talk about black culture is, you know, the economic strength and power of it too. So again, if you're not teaching students about the economic power of black culture and its imprint on the world, then you're doing them a disservice again, because how are they going to operate? If you go and work for, you know, Dior now, wherever, there's a sense, or Burberry, it doesn't matter where you're working, there's a sense you need to understand a more diverse fashion language that's inclusive of all people now. But also, you also need to know how not to make the mistakes that designers made in the past. So we don't talk about ethnic clothes anymore. That's gone. We don't talk about Orientalism anymore. That's gone. So we need the right language in place because you're now operating on a global scale, partly because technology's role in decentering has really, you know, helped, you know, for the whole landscape to change. So, you know, through technology, everybody can be part of fashion now. Everybody can make music. You know, everybody can create a brand. And people do, and they have very powerful voices. And so the gatekeeping of that keeps something centered has kind of been slightly, I'd say it's been torn down, if I'm honest with you.
Oh, wow.
We don't really need it anymore.
I really love the way I didn't even realize that. Wow.
Yeah, because
mic drop.
Well, you don't, suddenly we don't need Vogue. Suddenly we don't need, kids don't need Vogue. You don't need to tell kids how to dress. They have their own communities that are giving that information. So you do have to go back and understand, what are these mediums for? Fashion magazines were to tell the people. It was a means of communication. But if that's all around you now, actually, what do those institutions need to do? Now, the clever ones are moving with culture, but the ones that are kind of stuck in the mud, they're sort of becoming slightly useless. So I think that thinking about face in the context of, and your context as you as a student, the Excellence Prize has also been another way that we've seen these different voices come into the fore and speaking truth.
Yeah.
What was different before that they weren't necessarily being acknowledged, or there wasn't a space for the voices, and fashion couldn't see a way to either monetize or to understand how important these voices were, because it just was not looking in the correct direction. So it's not like culture didn't exist. It's just that they weren't looking. And so, it was, working on something like The Missing Thread, that project, the curation of that show at Somerset House, that told stories that, well, we build it as untold, fashion stories and Black culture, because we recognised that a lot of these stories were missing from the lexicon of fashion.
It was phenomenal, by the way.
So those stories, once you understand that those stories have a place in fashion, that you realise that, how important is fashion and how important is culture to fashion.
Okay.
And then you have to decenter your thinking, or else economically you lose out anyway. And I think that's the other thing that, when we talk about inclusivity and diversity and drives towards equity, businesses are now equating that with value and with economics. So, let's not, Edward Enninful at Vogue was a powerful economic move. Vogue was on its last legs, and actually Edward breathed new life into it.
Perspective.
But also economically, it meant more to a global majority. So, the decentering, again, that's almost an action of decentering. If you think about Vogue as a white elitist fashion institution moving towards a Black, editor, and how that introduced Vogue to a new space.
Yeah, and a wider audience.
A wider audience, but also it introduced the existing audience to new conversation pieces. And so that kind of shift of from the center slightly, let's just say, slightly to the left, to the right, doesn't matter, or up or down, doesn't matter which direction it goes in, but towards a different audience actually creates new things to talk about as well.
Let's talk about the FACE Summit. So how can moments like the FACE Summit, where industry, higher education come together and drive towards forward change?
Well, I think it's necessary at this point. Like we've had fantastic traction with FACE and education, and I think that we've done so much great work with education. But we are also, most of us are kind of thriving creatives operating within the industry as well. And many of us shut out, if you like, in the first round. So, let's just say the average age of, members of FACE might be around, I'm going to say 45, and that's going to be kind, but I think we're probably 50, So our activity in fashion was at a time when Black wasn't in fashion, or not Black skin anyway. So now what we're seeing is that expertise as practitioners and as educators, so this duplicity in the way we sort of act and the way we are and our experiences is very rich. And our connectivity to industry is very rich. So the combining, if you like, the combination of education and talk about fashion the fashion industry, the current fashion industry today, pulling that together and having this broad discussion at somewhere like the RCA about the future as well. I think this is the other thing. It's celebratory. It's not, we've had the pain and we've engaged with the trauma and we've built face. And in a way now it's, we have the Face Race Handbook, which is a guide to our allies.
Yeah.
That's a very strong document and a very strong resource to move forward with. But as Black people in fashion, we also want to celebrate, the enduring activities of people like Joe Casey Hayford, who will always talk about Oswald Boateng, but also new people. Martin Rose is doing amazing things at this point, right? Bianca Saunders, So I think it's really, the Adidas Originals is amazing. So suddenly we've got these these global voices having these conversations, and we need to celebrate that, but also frame it and contextualize it, or maybe even recontextualize it, because we've probably contextualized before, but to recontextualize those voices, to a broader audience. I think now is the time.
Okay, great. Well, that leads me to another question. Like, how can we effectively measure success in decentering spaces and building anti-racist frameworks?
That's a really good question, and it's quite a difficult question to answer. Specific. I don't have the answer to that question as such, but what I do understand is that particularly HE institutions are very good at measuring, collecting data, and creating action plans. So the if you like, for me, that is really in how the institutions begin to respond to these challenges. So early doors, we went to we wanted to change the NSS, the National Student Survey.
Remember that?
We wanted to include questions around equity, race, and equality. Now, as soon as you have a question about race in the NSS and equality and decolonisation or decentering of curriculums, institutions would have to respond. So then it would there'd be a chain reaction of change, because what you have to do is make sure that your students and your curriculums and your environments and your spaces and your resourcing is adequate for that change. So we all know that, COVID happened and COVID was fixed. And racism's been around for a very long time. And so where there is a will, I'd say there's a way. And I think the groundswell that's beginning to happen, because it could be economic as well, because you've got to remember that at this point, economically, institutions are struggling. You're losing out. So where is your customer? So maybe diversifying and changing the perspective of your institution allows it to become a global player. So when that happens, then there's the opportunity to capture data and respond, because everything we do in education ultimately is responsive. It drives me mad, actually, because we respond. We're never really preemptive. Which is sort of the difference between being a designer and somebody working in an institution. We wait for the data to come in, and then we respond. So if I over recruit, then I'll get more money. But I can't really speculate on how to make over recruitment happen. So sometimes I feel with education that the wheels are a bit slow to turn. So you need, if you like, the evidence of a decentered curriculum attracting a broader culture of students before the institution will respond, which is problematic because nothing ever really changes. So I feel like, to answer the question, it's really about institutions have fantastic ways of measuring, capturing data and responding through action plans. But at this point, to me, it's still not on their agendas. It's still not on their agendas.
What is one practical step that an institution can take today to work towards this vision of a decentered and anti-racist future?
I think, when we really started FACE, there was a real conversation about, audience. There was a real conversation about who's delivering the audience. It's something I always say or said, and I still say it. I'll just employ some more black people. It's quite simple.
Yeah.
You know, some things are actually quite simple. It's not that simple, but it's a step in the right direction, because I think as soon as you involve the right people in any organization, there's a seismic shift and change in the mentality of that organization, and its power to encourage new voices. So practically speaking, we've started. There's a lot of institutions now looking at things like reading lists, looking at decolonization as a practice. There's a lot of research in that area. The ref, for instance, is coming up in 29. It must be 29. Could be lying. There's a lot of research focus on EDI or equality or equity. So a lot of the work now is happening within institutions. It's just really now, practically speaking, how it's embedded in. But the whole change of decentering needs to happen from kind of the top all the way down. Thinking right across the boards. PVCs, VCs, deans, the whole thinking. And it needs to be kind of specific to industry, because the arts is still lacking behind. Some areas like business, we might find that there's a kind of a broader recognition of sort of global culture, and hopefully there's a kind of a response on the ground. But in something like the arts, in an area like the arts, it's still very stuck. So there's a bit more work to do and a bit more of a shift. But yeah, practically, decolonization, decentering curriculums, new voices, different voices, young voices, old voices. Any voice that is not represented creates change, but it also creates new people, right? New academics like yourself. Because you realize there's a possibility.
There is.
And I think that's the other thing is how does education ultimately empower students to then take the baton? Right?
Well, this is going to get me to segue to another moment at RCA where it was yourself, David Capo, and Harris Elliott, where you taught a class on identity.
That's right. That was about walking in someone else's shoes, right?
Yeah. And you told us to bring, I think it was like 2 objects that we could describe. And I think at the time I bought a really pointy boot and a Ghanaian sandal. And that was my first introduction to footwear and waist. And I remember that class so vividly that I sent you 3 an email just thanking you about that moment. And I was as a student. So literally it's definitely an honor just to be in your space talking about that.
I mean, for me, having taught for such a long time now and practiced, you're unaware sometimes of the impact you have on people. You really are. Sure. It becomes your job to a point. But to hear something like that, you realize if you amplify, then there'll be lots of Joyces, and there's lots of Andrews. So there's these opportunities for a much, more, a growth that's so much more, that would really maximize and have a maximum impact on communities. So you will have a profound impact on the students that you're teaching here. And sometimes you don't even have to say anything. It's just being there. One of the things I quite like doing is graduation. And I'll always push myself to the front of the queue. And every year I go to the graduation, I go to the gowning area and I say, oh, what you got for me? Because I don't particularly like my own gown. So I'm like, what you got? Oh, that green one looks cool. Can I have that green one? So I just wear whatever gown I like because I'm fashioned in it. So every time I turn up and everyone looks at me saying, what university do you? I don't know. I just like the fact that it's green. So I always push myself to the front. And I always like to lead the procession to the stage. Because that visibility is so important for all of the Black families and the students to see a Black. I might be the only one as well, by the way. There might be one other. But just to see that is really important. And if I'm not there, actually we're back to that old story.
Yeah.
You know, and the impact of our presence is so important. And
Profound.
sometimes you don't realize it. And that's why I've never left education, because every time I try to leave, somebody says to me, yeah, but Andrew, if you leave, like, who's going to do this?
Yeah.
And that was the other reason why FACE for me is so brilliant, because at some point I can leave now, because there's a battalion of allies.
Yeah.
So, you know, the FACE Race Handbook, which is a fantastic resource, but also not just for us, but for our allies. And it's really that document is about us, if you like, collating our expertise and our thoughts and our ideas and our practices and our experiences, and enabling our allies to use that information without us in the room. Because we don't always want to be, you know, it's not, oh, Joyce, do you want to talk about race today?
Yeah.
Oh, Joyce, do you want to talk about race today?
Yeah.
It's like, can't somebody else talk about race? And actually the answer in the past has been no. So I think sometimes, and I've said this because I've been told, but your voice is so important. And I said, well, maybe your voice is more important than mine. You imagine a white woman saying what I'm saying. How important is that? In my absence, if I'm not there, if I've got a cold, if I can't make it into work, or if I'm double booked, what happens? That conversation goes flat. So we need to be able to step away as well, you know, and have the conversation still happening. So resources, that kind of expertise is so important, so important.
Yeah.
So to get involved with FACE, you go off to our website, and you can, obviously, if you're a Black academic or a Brown academic, you can join. So, you know, you can become a member. And of course, we have our allies as well. So everybody can get involved in FACE. I think it's about, for me, it's always been about allowing Black and Brown voices to have space to talk freely. But not exclusively. So we've always encouraged, you know, broader, wider conversation pieces, but everybody can be involved in FACE. And ultimately, because of the nature of what we're doing, which is education and the arts, and it's born out of fashion, you know, that reach it means that everybody needs to be involved, really. You can't really be talking about the arts and fashion or the arts and fashion and blackness or culture. You can't really dismantle those ideas. So the imprint,
community.
I think the imprint today is it runs so deep that there's no way you can kind of dismantle fashion or the arts from society and culture. So it's everybody's business, really, and it's in everybody's interest to kind of understand these new perspectives, particularly when we start talking about ideas around decentering.
Wow. It's been an absolute pleasure sitting in front of you, Andrew, and speaking today. I'm so honored. And I'm just looking forward to the future and how we really make true change. And see a different world.
Thank you so much. And I think the future is bright, as I say. It's definitely bright.
I think that's a really pretty bow to end everything on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This podcast is from the Royal College of Art, home to the next generation of artists, innovators and entrepreneurs, and the world's #1 art and design university. You can learn more about our programmes at rca.ac.uk, as well as finding news and events relating to the college and our application portal if you're interested in studying at the RCA.